Welcome to the Savvy Sauce, where we have practical chats for intentional living. I'm your host, Laura Duggar, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm thrilled to introduce you to our sponsor, WinShape Marriage. Their weekend marriage retreats will strengthen your marriage while you enjoy the gorgeous setting, delicious food, and quality time with your spouse. To find out more, visit them online at winshapemarriage.org/savvy. My returning guest for today is Elizabeth Pehrson, and if possible, we are going to get even more practical than we did last week, as we're going to discuss ways to actually enjoy parenting while simultaneously preparing our children to launch as faithful and healthy adults someday. Here's our chat. Welcome back again to the Savvy Sauce, Elizabeth.
I'm so excited to be here. This is fun.
It's always a joy to get a chat with you, and we're going to go even more practical today. But do you mind sharing some disclaimers about that first?
Not at all. You know, when I was growing up, I grew up in the church, and I really looked at train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it, as a promise. And it really is a principle. And so as much as we want it to be A plus B equals C, it's not always that way. There are certain principles that we are to follow and God's asked us to. And so I think we need to focus on that and leave the rest to Him.
That's so good. So keeping that in mind, but then also hearing wise tips that we can hopefully implement. How do you think we can teach our children the importance of reciprocity, such as encouraging them to ask other people questions rather than just focusing the conversation on themselves, or encouraging them to do chores around the house rather than just expecting their parents to do all the work or overfunction for them?
Oh yeah, this one's right up my alley. I love this question so much. John F. Kennedy, gave his famous speech, ask not what you can, your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I think in the same way, we want each family member to ask not what can you do for me, but what can I do for the family? And we believe that wholeheartedly. And so because of that, we started assigning age-appropriate chores at the age of 3. And they have a chore every single day of the week, except for Sunday, even when they're busy, even when they have baseball, football, lacrosse, didn't matter what it was. We have this whiteboard in our home, and it's like the motherboard of all things in our family. And it's got on the top part of it, it has our calendar, appointments, practices, games, meetings, meals for the week, like everything you can imagine that it takes to run our family is at the top part. And then at the second part of the whiteboard, we have a section that says, because we clothe and feed you. And then it has their names underneath that. And so when they leave for school, I look at the calendar, I look at everything that needs to be gotten done that day or that week for the family, and then I delegate it to each of the children. And so I would assign them each a chore. And so when they would get home from school, it was right there where they would walk in and put their backpacks down, and they knew to look at their chore, and they knew that it had to be finished before dinner. And it made it so easy because there was no nagging, there was no reminding, there was no, begging them to do it and following up. It was just so much a part of each of their day, just like going to school or brushing their teeth. It was something they knew they had to do. And in addition to that, in our home, when our children turn 8, we have this rule that you are no longer a consumer, but you are a contributor. So at the age of 8, they have to start doing all their own laundry, washing their own sheets, and lots of other substantially harder chores. And then at 9, they have to start mowing the yard. They start cooking and things that actually really contribute to the family as a whole. And, in the last episode, I talked a lot about modeling for our kids, what we want them to learn. And as far as talking about having them ask questions and reciprocity, it's the same thing as you have to model it, right? You have to model that for your children. And so let them hear you ask the cashier how her day's going, even if it embarrasses them, or, how you speak to the waiter or the waitress. Let them see you notice the neighbor struggling with something in their yard. Like, let them watch you thank their father for taking the car to get the oil changed or taking the trash out. Just simple things like that. Something that our mentors taught us that we implemented with our children right away. And this was, I cannot emphasize the impact that this had on our children enough. But when somebody, anybody, but particularly an adult, asked you a question, you looked them in the eyes, you answered their question, and then you responded with a question. You asked them a question. That was a game changer. I can't tell you how many bus drivers, teachers, coaches said, I've never had a student ask me how my weekend was. I've never once, when they get on the bus, asked me, how am I doing today? How was my day? And again, it's not for any like praise or anything like that. But my point is, it's so countercultural that it stands out. And it's so important to have your children learn from a young age what it looks like to look an adult in the eye and ask for a question. If they can't do that when they're older, they'll never be able to advocate for themselves.
I love all things countercultural. I think because a lot of times it does point back to Jesus, just even somebody experiencing that and having a wow factor.
Yeah,
Ultimately, it's because the goodness of the Lord that they've just experienced.
absolutely. Absolutely. So.
Do you have maybe a handful of habits in the home that you see as most essential for families so that everyone living there can enjoy and experience a joyful life together?
Oh, I'm sure that we do. I think joy in a home is rarely accidental. It's cultivated, it's intentional. And I would just say, ask what, brings your family joy and then do more of that. It's most likely going to be different for everybody. And I can only speak for, for us. But what we loved, what we did, family dinners around the dinner table were non-negotiable. There were seasons around the dinner table. That part was negotiable because there were seasons like we had four boys playing football. And so we would have practices 5 nights a week and, four games on Saturday. And so we would take the dinner to the ballpark and we would literally sit there as a family because I wasn't going to constantly never have family dinner just for the whole, 6 months in the fall or, winter or whatever. And so, but we used dinner time to ask intentional questions, to laugh, to tell stories. We joked, we role played. That was a big one for us. Just as a family, we would do that together. And probably the best thing that we did and the thing that we still do is we make things fun. We play games, like really fun ones. Not that board games aren't fun, those are fun, but we, like, instead of, our kids are grown now, and for Easter, like they will all come home and I will have created games out of Easter eggs with all different types. Not going to find them, but just different types. I'll line up 20 Easter eggs with different colors, and then the first person that they get like 10 seconds to look at it. And then the first person that can replicate it with those colors, things like that, like what was in the Easter eggs, questions, that kind of stuff. One year we did an Easter egg hunt where we tied two people together. One was on the back and the one below was blindfold. So the one on the back had to tell them where to go and what to do, or we leg tied their legs together. Like just things to make it creative or fun. At Christmas, we always play reindeer games. It's my kids' favorite thing that we do. We've often gotten in inflatables. And we've done an Easter egg hunt that way where everyone's wearing these huge inflatables, or we play a kickball game. And that was our Christmas card this last year. But just anything that wants to make them want to participate, right? Want to have them want to come home. So that's what I would say.
Oh, I love it. And I don't remember the direct quote. It was from Bob Goff, but just saying how the more outlandish it is, or the more that you add variety or break from the norms, that's what they're going to remember. So I'm sure your kids have incredible memories of all those holidays.
Yes.
Do
I hope
you?
so anyway.
Oh, I'm sure that we'll
Yeah.
have to steal some of those. But do you also have any stories to share for the payoff now that you're experiencing? Because when your children were little, you started them off with focusing on chores and hard work.
How long do you have?
Give
Seriously.
everything you got.
Okay, chores for children when they are young, it has proven to be the single biggest indicator of success when they're older, hands down. Chores, specifically hard chores. They teach your kids responsibility. They teach them resourcefulness. It instills in them confidence. It instills in them capability. It instills in them competence. And I could give you example after example after example of how I've seen this pay off for my children. And I would say, even in some ways, more importantly, how I have seen it negatively impact their friends whose parents did not require them to work at home when they were younger. I remember my oldest son went off to college, and he called me after orientation, and he's a man of few words, doesn't say thank you very often. And he said, "Mom, I have to tell you something." And I said, "What?" And he said, "This is a pretty hard school to get into, and the people are competent, they're smart." He said, "I have never in my life seen a group of individuals that are so incapable of doing anything for themselves." He's like, "We're standing in line to get our what's the ID, with their picture taken." He said, "Kid after kid after kid's on their phone. Hey, I don't have a credit card. I don't have a debit card. I don't know how to do this." He said, and then he gets to college and it's like they don't know how to get their oil changed. They don't know how to, make their own doctor's appointment. And he thanked me. He's like, I'm sorry I resisted it when I was younger, but I just want to say thank you." And my daughter, Libby, called me one day and she said, "Mom, you're not going to believe this." And I said, "What?" And so she tells me of this story of her roommate. And her roommate had not left campus in 6 weeks. And so she asked her, she said, "Hey, I thought you had a car here." And she said, "I do." And she said, "Well, why don't you ever leave?" And she said, "Well, I don't have gas." And she said, "Well, do you need money?" And she said, "Well, no, I don't need money." She said, "I thought maybe you needed gas money." She said, "No." And she said, "Well, then what's going on?" She goes, "I've never put gas in my car." And that's not a chore, but that is a basic skill. Think about that. Dropping your child off to college with a car and never having shown them or made them get their own gas. And then she called me a couple of weeks later and she said to me, "Mom, did you know it's possible not to know how to hand wash dishes?" And I said, "Well, that's not possible. What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, she was just buying new dishes, plastic dishes. She was buying them because she didn't know how to wash them." And so she said, I said to her, "Hey, like you can just wash her dishes." She goes, "We don't have a dishwasher." And she said, so I had to show her how to use soap and water to wash her own dishes. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I mean, I have another daughter that went off to college potluck, and we were at the very first day moving them in, and the mom was barking orders, telling everyone what to do. And after about 10 minutes, I was like, whew. I went outside in the hallway and I just sat down and removed myself. And her husband looks at me and he goes, "Wow, you learned quickly." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Get out of her way and let her do it." And I said, "Well, what about your daughter?" He goes, "Oh, she's never done anything for herself. She does everything for her." We got in the car to go home, and I just said to my husband, I said, "It's going to be really hard for our daughter because this girl's never done anything for themselves." I mean, I could give you story after story after story, but when you require your children to put in hard work when they're really young, they don't panic when life requires effort later on. They aren't entitled to comfort. They aren't entitled to other people doing things for them. They know how to contribute, wherever they land, whether it's in a dorm room, a house, or, college house or beyond. My kids joke with me. They're like, "Mom, this can be a gift or a curse, knowing how to do everything." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" They're like, "Well, nobody else knows how to do everything, and they know that we do. So they just want us to do it." And I was like, "Sorry about that. Sorry you have to take care of it." But again, it's like we are trying to train our kids up for independence, not to be dependent on us. And they go off to college or they graduate college and they're already going to have first, like so many first, being away from home, sleeping with a stranger in their same room, dorm room. Like so many things are going to have to navigate. And then do you want them to have to figure out how to do laundry, how to do dishes, no, it's like, wow, chores instill that. And then when they're really young.
So, did you and your husband sit down and map out everything that you wanted them to know, or how did you come up with these chores? And what are some more examples of
Oh,
them?
yeah. And it's so interesting. It's so interesting because I thought about this when I was thinking about our time together. But there's a book that we read. Well, there's a couple of books that we read that were pretty impactful, but one of them was called Cleaning House by Kay.
Yes.
You know it, Kay Wells Wyma. And so her 12 things, the idea of the book is to think about all the things you want to know your children to know how to do and know how to do well when they leave home. And then you take 1 month and you just focus on that specific thing. And so we sat down and her 12 things weren't our 12 things. Some of them were, but some of them were not. And so we just did month after month after month of wanting them to know exactly, how to do these things, when we're grown or when they're grown. And so we did that. But I mean, my husband, anytime he was working on a lawnmower, anytime he was doing anything in the yard, he gathered the boys around like, hey, boys, come on. And he was trying to show them or fixing the toilet or whatever it might have been. And I would do the same thing, whether it was in the garden or whether it was in the kitchen or whether it was outside with yard work, whatever, just to gather them around and involve them because they don't know. I mean, it's not their fault, but they won't know unless we show them. And one of the things I love is that the earlier you start showing them and training them up in these chores and in this yard work and in managing a home, the longer you have at home to train them up to do it well. But a lot of people think, oh, they're too young, or I'll just wait until they're older. Well, truth is, by the time they're 16, you really have very limited time with them, very limited. And you're like, oh, when am I going to do that? They're at their sports, they're at school things, they're driving, they're with friends. And so it's like the earlier you can start, the better.
It's so good. Even I'm thinking we could even involve our kids in what else have we not thought of that you want to learn how to do? Because it really is a gift to be trained and to take that time to
Oh, yeah.
share.
I mean, and that kind of goes back to what we talked about last time, just being lifelong learners and curious. Like, I don't know how to do this, but let's figure it out together.
Well, and I'm going to also link to a previous episode. I did interview Kay on that book,
Thank you.
but do you remember the other one that you also read related to it?
Oh, yes, there was a season where there's actually two of them, but there is a season where my focus and my priority was ridding entitlement from my children. I meet with moms all the time and they're like, oh, my children are so spoiled. And I'm like, well, I'm curious who spoils them,
Hmm.
and it really does start with us. It stems with us, even if it's the ones where moms will say, well, I mean, I don't give them that brand new thing, but their grandmother does. Well, technically, you're the gatekeeper of what comes in and out of your home. You can allow it or not allow it. You can say to them, you know what? They don't need the newest iPad. They don't need the newest Lululemon or whatever. I want you to offer an experience with them. Something different, something like that. You can control that. But there was a season where that's all I saw, and I saw it in my children's hearts as well. And so I read the book, How to Raise Grateful Children in an Entitled World. And then I also read the book Seven by Jen Hatmaker a long time ago. A lot of our philosophies have changed, but back in the day, a long time ago, it was an entitlement. It said an experiment against a mutiny against excess. And so it was another challenge we did. Like we did the 12-month challenge from Kay's book, we did a 7-month challenge from her book. And we took 7 areas where we have so much excess and we stripped it down 1 month at a time. And I'm telling you, it was hard. Not only because our children didn't want to do it, but it was hard for me, particularly like the month of technology. I mean, you're talking no TV, no cell phone, no, I mean, other than phone calls, no scrolling, none of that. No podcasts, no, you couldn't use it just for a month, just to have stillness, quiet. I mean, it was crazy hard. But then we noticed that the puzzles started coming out and coloring started coming out and creativity started coming out. It requires 15 minutes of boredom for creativity to set in. And I would say it's a little bit longer for my kids, but the creativity did set in and it was unbelievable. 1 month, we got to choose, but we picked 7 foods. That's all you could eat for 1 month. When you went out, that's all you could choose from. It was so hard. It was unbelievable. But what caught me so strongly was in her book. She starts out by saying she had 3 young children at home and she was adopting 2 children from Ethiopia. And she had already been over to visit them twice and they were literally starving to death. And, her heart just wanted them home, but because of all the logistics, she couldn't get them here yet. And she said one day she made fish sticks for her kids and then she went up to go switch laundry. She came back down a few minutes later and she saw all the fish in the trash can. And she was like, what in the world? So she asked them, she said, did y'all not eat? And they're like, we did. And she said, well, I just saw all the fish sticks in the trash can. And they're like, we didn't have ketchup. And she's like, you just threw away 5 pounds of fish, or whatever it was, because you didn't have ketchup. Yet we have two other children across the world that would give anything to have those fish sticks. And I was like, I see that with my children. It's like, I don't want that, or I don't care for that, or that clothing. I'd rather something else. And so for 1 month, they only could wear 7 articles of clothing total. That's it. And it's crazy because you think everyone's looking at you like, why are you wearing the same thing every single day? No one even cares what you're doing. But it just changed your whole mindset and perspective. So entitlement was a big one for us. And those two books were super helpful with that.
Well, and even it sounds like a version of fasting,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
we
I
can
mean,
learn so
we
much.
told our kids all, since they were young, it doesn't matter what it is, whatever you can't fast from owns you. It does, whatever that is. And so some months the food was harder for others. For some month, the clothing was harder. The girls, the clothing was harder. The boys could care less. For some month, it was the technology. But it's like whatever it is that's got a stronghold in your heart, that's what owns you.
And now a brief message from our sponsor.
Friends, I'm excited to share with you today's sponsor, WinShape Marriage. Do you feel like you need a weekend away with your spouse and a chance to grow in your relationship together at the same time? WinShape Marriage is a fantastic ministry that provides weekend marriage retreats to help couples grow closer together in every season and stage of life. From premarital to parenting to the empty nest phase, there is an opportunity for you. WinShape Marriage is grounded on the belief that the strongest marriages are the ones that are nurtured, even when it seems things are going smoothly, so that they're stronger if they do hit a bump along their marital journey. These weekend retreats are hosted within the beautiful refuge of WinShape Retreat, perched in the mountains of Rome, Georgia, which is a short drive from Atlanta, Birmingham, and Chattanooga. While you're there, you will be well fed, well nurtured, and well cared for. During your time away in this beautiful place, you and your spouse will learn from expert speakers and explore topics related to intimacy, overcoming challenges, improving communication, and more. I've stayed on site at WinShape before, and I can attest to their generosity, food, and content. You will be so grateful you went. To find an experience that's right for you and your spouse, head to their website, winshapemarriage.org/savvy. That's WINSHAPE marriage.org/savvy, SAVVY. Thanks for your sponsorship. Another big topic is discipline, and that's something that parents are consistently interested in discussing, probably so that we can all balance rules and relationship. So, for any of the other parents who are also exhausted and maybe don't know what consequences to utilize as they seek to influence their children, what are some natural consequences and strategic discipline that you've offered before or that you can think of, especially with teens in the home?
Yeah, discipline basically means to disciple. And so we're training our kids up. We can't expect them just to know it on their own and intuitively think that's not a wise choice, so I shouldn't make it, right? Like we're here because they need us. God entrusted them to us. But I love that you said consequences because that's really the way I choose to look at discipline because childhood is meant to be the training ground for independence. And natural consequences, in my opinion, are the best way to do that because I think consequences should connect to directly to our daily, to their choices, to my choices, because as we tell them, every single choice you make, every single one has a consequence, good or bad. You're going to have a consequence. You reap what you do. So therefore, it is so important to acknowledge and recognize what you choose. Not my response to it, but to what you choose. You oversleep an alarm, which is middle schoolers and high schoolers are known to do. You oversleep the alarm, you experience the discomfort of being late, whether that's missing the whole day because you as the mom are busy doing other things or you're at work, or maybe you just missed that test the first period and you can then drive yourself to school. But you have to suffer that consequence. I'm not going to rescue you from that. Or, you forget to bring in a project that you have worked on for days and days and days and days, and you forget to bring it in, your grade will reflect that. That is a natural consequence. I had a son, I won't name him, but I had a son that chose to make the decision to cheat on a chemistry test. And the teacher called me and said, in high school, AP, and said, he's a great student. He made a poor choice. He didn't study. He's busy with football. And she said, so I'm going to let him retake it and do. And I said, no, he chose to make that decision. Please fail him like you would do any other student. I do not want him to ever, ever, ever consider doing this again. And she goes, well, it might be on his transcript. I said, okay, so be it. But I'm more interested in his long-term character and who he's becoming than I am about his AP chemistry score. I'm more interested in that. So the natural consequences, or to give him a zero on that. You have the stud athlete as a son, and they forget their cleats or their jerseys at home. Guess what? They sit out from practice. They sit out from the game that afternoon. It's not going to be the end of the world. Although we think it is, they think it is. It's not. So I try to think of discipline, not as punishing, but more as preparing them for adulthood. And, like we talked about the other day, I encourage moms not to bail, but to let them fail. I mean, it literally could seem like the end of the world to your child, but in the grand scheme of things, it has no bearing on their life later on. But many moms treat every little thing as if it does. But I just try to tell moms when I meet with them, your child's employer will not care what they made on a middle school project. They won't. If they forgot it and got a C, their employer will not care that they made a C on that, or maybe even an F. They will not even care what your son or your daughter's high school GPA is. They will not care if you missed that baseball game, you missed that tournament, but they will care if you are hardworking, if you are responsible, if you take ownership for your actions. And I think natural consequences are the best way to teach all of those things.
Well, and I would assume if we actually follow through, it's so painful in the moment, but it probably doesn't take many times to learn that lesson.
No, not at all. And particularly if you have multiple children, I remember I was giving a talk on entitlement and how we rescue our children so easily. And I was setting up, and so I was getting things out of my car, taking things back and forth into this, building where I was setting up. And as I get into the back seat, I see this project that my daughter literally had been working on for 2 weeks. And when she got out of the car that day, she left it. And I just thought, here I am talking about this. I can either do it, nobody will know, take it up there. But then I was like, no, what does that teach her? Mom's going to bail me out every single time. And it was like, it crushed me. But I was more interested in what's going to happen for her long term. And another thing, if you have siblings, multiple children, they can learn from each other, not just from their own personal suffering. That same daughter, I'll never forget it. She came home from school. She was in the third grade. And my kids know, like, your schoolwork is on you. It is not on me. I have already been to kindergarten. I have already been to third grade. I've already been to high school. It is on you. And I email the teachers at the beginning of the year. I just want you to know that my third grade daughter will be doing her entire projects, schoolwork, tests, grade, everything will be her. So please grade her on a third grade level, because what's happening is parents are doing their projects, parents are doing their papers, all of the things. And so it's like, wow, hers looks terrible. It is on par for a third grader though. So I email the teachers at the beginning and I let them know that they are responsible. They can choose to teach them in any way that they want, discipline them in any way they want. And my daughter came home from school one day and she had this big thing due the next day. And she's like, Mom, oh my goodness, I left it in my desk. Would you please email her and see if I can come in early in the morning and get it and work on it? And I said, sure. And all my kids were like, you will? And so I emailed and I said, Dear Mrs. Prilliman, she left her assignment in her desk. Please feel free to punish her and discipline her in any way that you see fit. And she's like, Mom, she was so upset. But the other kids are like, mental note, I will never do that. So they can learn, from each other as well. So.
That is a benefit of having siblings. I love hearing those stories. That helps it sink in.
Yeah.
But Elizabeth, also, what can we be doing while our children are still in the home in hopes of them experiencing wise financial stewardship and freedom financially when they leave home?
Yeah, I'm going to be very honest. David and I were not the best at this. It's not our greatest strength, that is for sure. It is not our natural genius. And with a family of 10, money was always tight. It really was. But we didn't want our kids to feel the weight of that. We didn't want them to feel that burden. But having said that, we did teach them delayed gratification. We did teach them saving before spending, distinguishing wants from needs. That's a big difference. Working for what they desire or what they wanted. And they had to participate in paying for part or all of what they wanted. And that included travel sports. I mean, there were times where we had 5 or 6 in travel sports. I mean, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And so they either had to contribute financially if they could, depending on their age, or I remember one year my son was young and he wanted to do it, and it was going to be $2,800. And he was very gifted in baseball, and we wanted him to have this experience. But we knew that it was going to impact the entire family because all of our kids were still young. It wasn't like we could leave them at home. Everybody would be going every single weekend to all these different places. And so we said, okay, we're going to sit down as a family and we're going to talk about this. And so they agreed. They wanted him to do it. They wanted to go to all these tournaments as a family. But so we decided that we would not eat out until that was paid off. The equivalent of that was paid off. And anytime anyone wanted to like stop at McDonald's or pick up something, we're like, remember, we're paying for Jack's baseball. And it was a family effort. And so, I mean, it could be their homecoming dress if they want something extravagant, or things that were above and beyond, over a roof over their head, or food on the table, or clothes, their basic needs. But we just tried to model financially real life. And we all know that just because we want something doesn't mean we get it. It doesn't work that way. And when we give our kids everything they want, I would argue that we are setting them up, and sometimes their potential future spouses, up for failure. Because I don't know if you know this, but this generation is the first generation not to make as much or have as much as their previous 2 generations before them. Typically, we make more than our parents and our grandparents, but this is the first one not to. And that's why grown adults are still living at home. So it's like, wow, if we can model this for our kids, that, hey, just because you want that extra thing doesn't mean you get it. You got to work some extra jobs. You got to pick up some extra shifts, maybe ask for some money chores at home, that we would offer them. But we just tried to model it for real life. But like I said, we wasn't our greatest strength.
Oh, I bet even more of a strength than you realize just hearing that example. I did not know that about the generation. That's fascinating.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, one of my all-time favorite, there's a TED Talk. It's old. It's like a really short one. And I'm blanking on the lady's name, but she was in college and her dad was an attorney and he was very affluent. They had a lot of money. And back in the day, I think this was like in the 90s, 2000s maybe, there was this new pair of jeans that were out and they were $120. And every other pair of jeans were like $50 or something, $40. And so she called her dad, who could easily afford it, and said, Dad, oh my gosh, I need a pair of these jeans. Everybody, she was in college at University of Florida. Everybody has these jeans. I want a pair. And he goes, okay, well, what are you going to do to go get the money? She's like, Dad, come on. I know you can give it to me. He said, no, that's not the way life works. So she happened to be in the student center and she saw one of those little advertisements, need a house cleaner. And she's like, my parents made me do chores. I know how to clean a house. So she pulled the little number. She went to the lady's house. She cleaned her house, got the $120. And the lady said, well, when are you coming back? And she said, oh, no, no, I just needed one pair of jeans. Like, I'm not coming back. And she said, no, you did an amazing job. Well, this girl went on to start an organization while she was in college, a business. Now it's like on a Fortune 500 something, I don't even know, but it's called Student Maid, MAID. And she had 500 employees by the time she was a senior. And she was cleaning apartments, houses, but if her dad had given her the $120 because he could to get the pair of jeans. So it's like, get out there and figure it out. And so I just love that story.
Wow, I love that as well.
Yeah.
And totally different topic, but when it comes to caring for our health and our bodies, if we truly believe our bodies are a temple for God, what are ways that we can model and encourage our children to live wisely in that way?
Yeah, I'm glad you said model, because really that's what it comes down to. I mean, if they see us beating ourselves up, not prioritizing sleep, not moving our bodies, not eating well, that's what they're going to do. I mean, it's just history has proven itself. You can look at cultures, those that move their bodies, sleep, rest on the Sabbath. I mean, they're a healthier culture. And so all of those things, eating with balance, not obsession, resting on Sundays. I mean, even in the church world, that's almost unheard of to take the Sabbath off. And I would really say, particularly if you have daughters, not that it doesn't matter for sons as well, but it really impacts daughter, is speaking respectfully about the body that God has given you.
Mhm.
I sadly see so many women talk trash about their own looks or their own appearance, their body. If I could just fix this, I wish I didn't have this. And then they expect their daughters not to do the same. And so when we say, oh, honey, you're beautiful, they're like, well, you don't think you are, and they see right through it. I mean, I want my daughters to be strong, not skinny, right? I want them to be healthy, not appearance driven. I want them to know that mom got up and went to the gym every morning. Mom made sure she got outside and got sunshine and got on a walk. Culture already puts so much pressure on these young girls and their size. Oh my goodness, it like just breaks my heart. And so the last thing they need is for us to start, for striving for unattainable goals, right? That put an expectation on them and their appearance. I mean, that's the last thing that they need. And so David and I have always tried to, well, I would say we tried very, 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 very hard to compliment their character and their effort, but never their appearance. Most of the times when you hear parents applauding and just talking about how good looking someone is, how beautiful they are, it's nothing that they did to earn. I mean, you'll hear something, my son is so tall and big and strong. And I'm like, he did nothing. God gave him that, and if you happen to have a very small son like I do, and if that's what you're praising over here, what does that speak to this child? Or, oh my goodness, you're so beautiful. And so we try to focus on their heart, the internal, their, the stewardship of what God has given them, but never appearance. It's more taking care of the body. And we believe the important part of that is the heart and the soul. So we just want them to have the goal of honoring the life that God entrusted to them, the body that God entrusted to them.
Such wise principles. And then when we think about spiritual life as well, what wisdom can you share for parents who want to help their children cultivate a flourishing spiritual life?
Well, one prayer for our children is that they would each have a faith of their own, not one that's handed down, not a formula, but a relationship with Jesus. And so with that in mind, we tried to focus on the heart of who Jesus is and not the rules of God. We never wanted them to view God as this like scary judge, with his gavel, like handing down these judgments, but a God who genuinely loves them regardless of what they do. And so we wanted that to be their own unique personal relationship, not one that looks like ours, acts like ours. It's like this cookie cutter. So we encourage them just to pray naturally, not formally, but we talked about God in a real casual way, like in our coming and our going, not this big Sunday conversation, you have at the dinner table after church, but we wanted them to see our own dependence on God, which was every single day. And we wanted to create space for them to have their own unique personal faith. And one thing I've learned is that faith cannot be manufactured, but you can cultivate the soil where it grows. And I'll just say this really quick. In an effort to have them have a faith of their own, it was so neat. They all went to the same church, but their faith looked so different from their siblings. And there was a time we had all four of them at one college in Athens. And so they're all there. And we were visiting, and I said, hey, well, we'll go to church tomorrow morning, with y'all. And they all kind of looked at me like I had three heads. And I thought, well, don't y'all go to church? Please tell me y'all go to church, That's not what they meant. They all four went to completely different churches.
Wow.
I was mind blown. I was like, this is the most ecumenical family I've ever met. Like, I was like, I had no idea that is how different their relationships with the Lord are as for what they were seeking in a church. And I was just so grateful for that.
When was the first time you listened to an episode of The Savvy Sauce? How did you hear about our podcast? Did a friend share it with you? Will you be willing to be that friend now and text 5 other friends or post on your socials anything about the Savvy Sauce that you love. If you share your favorite episodes, that is how we continue to expand our reach and get the good news of Jesus Christ in more ears across the world. So we need your help. Another way to help us grow is to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Each of these suggestions will cost you less than a minute, but it will be a great benefit to us. Thank you so much for being willing to be generous with your time and share. We appreciate you. One other practical thing too, do you have just any tech tips, especially because you've raised so many teens already?
Oh, tech tips. We had this big charging station in our kitchen, and so the kids had to put their phones there at night, and it would charge like all of them. And so we could see if the phone was not up at night, and there were some serious consequences if they broke those rules. I remember one time my daughter, after we went to bed, she snuck back downstairs and got her phone and brought it upstairs. And anyway, I kept getting these notifications come through on my iPad, and I was like, what in the world? Well, I didn't even realize the clouds or it's over my head, but whatever reason, hers was beeping on mine. And so we went in there and she had her phone under her pillow. She was texting somebody. And so when she got home from school that next day, her door was off of the hinges. And she was, as a middle school girl, her privacy was so important. I was like, you can change in the bathroom, but you have shown us that you cannot earn privacy right now. You don't make the choices with it. But it is really hard. I think a lot of people, their natural inclination is just to remove it all from them. But I hesitate to encourage anyone to do that, because the truth of the matter is the world we live in is full of technology. And if you just completely say you can't have it, and then next thing you know, they're 18, they go off to college or whatever the age is, and you give it to them, they haven't been in the home where you've been training them up how to manage your time with it, put, limits on the time, how much you can spend on it, that kind of thing. And so it's like, you're never going to outsmart your children in technology. They're already smarter than you are. But it's like, how can you help them with the time management? Talking with them about like what they're putting before their eyes on the technology, that kind of thing. The same goes for TV. We would never watch something in front of our children that we would want them to think is normal, ever. And so it's like, it's not, we don't want to normalize that.
That's good. And really, I'm hearing this theme, a key ingredient for everything we've discussed so far is actually a fruit of the spirit, self-control. So knowing that discipline and self-control are actually going to lead to freedom, how can we help our children grow up to live an appropriately disciplined life?
Yeah, my dad used to say this thing all the time. He would say, the slave to the compass has the freedom of the seas. The rest must sail close to the shore. And it's so true. I mean, if you want to do that, you have to come under the authority of the boat. In other words, you can't just do whatever you want on a boat and be able to sail the whole ocean. It doesn't work that way. You have to follow the captain's orders, and you have to follow the mechanisms that make the ship move, right? And so it's like, but if you do that, if you master that, if you're a slave to the compass, to the sails, to the way the boat works, you can have the freedom of the seas. And the same is true of discipline and of self-control, right? We must exhibit that in order to have freedom. And so when our children exhibited obedience and discipline and self-control, we then gave them more freedom, more responsibilities. And then when they didn't follow instructions, like my daughter with the cell phone, they didn't do what was expected of them, we pulled in the reins a little bit. Dave Ramsey, years and years ago, before my children were older, he shared the analogy of the rope. And I loved it because he said, the more your children exhibit responsibility, making the right choices, they're being obedient, you let out that rope. And at one end, it's almost like you've got a rope around their waist. You're letting it out, letting them experience some more independence. But then the second that they don't do that, you kind of rein it back in. If they make a poor choice, they stay out past their curfew, whatever it might be, you pull it back in. And so it's a very important analogy for his family. So important, though, when his oldest daughter went off to college, Rachel, she goes off to college, he wraps up this beautiful gift, and it was a rope. And it was the rope with the round, and he said, and he tied things on it, like she went to Tennessee, I think. So it had like an orange thing on it. And then it had the colors of her high school and all these things that represented her life. And he said, hey, for 18 years, I've been holding on to this end of the rope. but now it's time I let it go and I'm giving it to you. You're going to manage that rope all on your own. And so it meant the world to her because they knew how important. And so she put it on her doorknob in her dorm room. And every time she left and entered, she saw that, that rope, realizing that she was responsible for how far she let that thing out and how far she pulled that in. And so discipline, self-discipline is huge. At the end of the day, we just wanted to show our children that discipline and self-control, it isn't a restriction, right? It's the pathway to freedom. And I've got to tell you, my kids are more disciplined than I am. I mean, my two oldest sons are 26 and 25, and they set timers on their phone. And so they literally can only, and each other has the passcode, so they can't even override it. They can only be on their phone for 3 hours a day at all for anything. And they do it during the hours where they're at work so that they know they can't be on it anyway. I mean, it's already self-limiting. And it's like they know that this is a temptation. They don't want to waste that time. And so, and when you see a child, when you train up a child in discipline, it's amazing how it spills over into other areas. They both are very disciplined with how many books they read, how far they run every day. Like, I mean, they're very disciplined individuals because I think it's contagious. That self-discipline just kind of permeates all the other areas of your life as well.
And that is so encouraging because I guess I just envision like we're planting seeds and we've gotten to hear a few of the seeds that you planted, and now it grows up even bigger than you could have probably ever asked or imagined.
Oh yeah. I mean, sometimes their discipline frustrates me because like I'll need to talk to them and they're on like a 23-mile run and they can't talk, or, like I'll want to call them and they're like, Mom, I can't use my phone right now. And I'm like, come on, but they are disciplined. It just drives me crazy sometimes.
Oh, I love that so much.
Yeah.
So, Elizabeth, as parents, what else can we do now to help our kids eventually reach maturity and independence as adults?
Yeah, I mean, again, I can't say it enough. Childhood is meant to be the training ground for independence. So every single day they are training you or you are training them. And it's like, are you training them up for the independence, maturity, or are you training them up to be dependent upon you? Are you teaching them that your proximity is what keeps them safe? And it's like, okay, so we're going to make these choices when they're young. Might be harder on us because I have moms say to me all the time, I mean, it's just easier when I do it. And I'm like, it is. Or they're like, they'll never do a job as good as I do. They won't. But you know what? It's like, it doesn't matter. It's not about what's easy on us. It's what's best for them for the long run. So, it goes back to that book we talked about. But you can really just think of Kay's book. You can really think about anything that you want to know, that you want them to know how to do well and reach maturity and master whatever that is. And, most people, not intentionally, but subconsciously think, oh my goodness, by magic at the stroke of their 18th birthday at midnight, they're just going to know how to do these things. And they don't. They don't know how to do these things. I mean, my oldest son went off to college, and 2 weeks after he went off, I came back home and I was at Target and I ran into this lady and who had also dropped off her daughter. And she said to me, how are you doing? And I said, I'm fine. How are you? She goes, I mean, are you managing? And I'm like, managing what? And she's like, without your son. And I said, yes. She, without my son. She goes, well, I have to ask you, how many times have you been up there? And I said, since 2 weeks ago when we dropped him off? And she said, yeah. And I said, I haven't. Should I ask how many times you've been up there? She goes, well, one time she called me because I forgot to teach her how to use her diabetic medicine. So I had to drive and teach her how to do that. And I thought, okay, in my mind, I'm thinking that was kind of a really big deal to not, know how to do. And then she said, and then another time she called me and she chewed me out because I didn't pack laundry detergent for her. And I thought, oh, you packed her stuff? She didn't do that? And she said, well, I mean, I just was doing it for her. And she goes, I had to tell her I did pack laundry detergent. And she said, no, the only thing I've seen you pack are those little round things that I've seen you put in the dishwasher.
Oh no.
This is what she tells me. And I was like, that she's seen you put in the dishwasher. She goes, I had to tell her that laundry pods are made too. So I had to go up and teach her how to do laundry. And then the third time I just missed her. So I went up there. But I thought, wow, like we are training them to fly from us. That is the ultimate goal, is that they are independent, that they can leave us. But the hardest thing about it is accepting that success if you do it well. Because that's the last thing you want to do, is have your child not need you anymore. Moms thrive on being needed, particularly by our children. But honestly, that is what God gave them to us for so that they can go out and launch onto their own. So we just started training them up as soon as we possibly could on little things like solving problems or managing their own schedules. That's a big one. You shouldn't be asking them, what homework do you have? What test do you have? What paper do you have? How can I help you? Don't do that tonight because you've got to do your homework. Let them manage their own schedules. Let them set their own alarms. If they oversleep it, there is a natural consequence, so they won't keep doing that anymore. And I mean, I had a daughter that slept through every alarm we ever set. It didn't matter how loud it was. So I was not going to give in to that. So we literally bought an alarm that was a round ball. And on this round ball, it would be on the floor. And when her alarm would go off, it would roll away from her bed. And so she couldn't not turn it off. She'd have to get out of bed to turn it off. And so, I mean, there's ways you can do it if you really want to, but training them up how to advocate for themselves. Most children don't know how to advocate for themselves, which is why the most recent stat right now on Fox News, I saw it 2 months ago, 29% of college graduates are taking their parents with them to their job interviews. 29% are taking their parents with them. They're 23 years old. Think about that. Let that set in. Teaching them how to shop for, prepare, cook meals. You have conflict, healthy conflict, recover from mistakes, try again. I mean, our job, I've already said it, but our job is not to make their lives easy, and it's not to do what's easy for us. It's to make them capable.
Wow, you have been so inspirational to learn from. And one more thing on that, when if we're very encouraged, we're going to be more consistent and do this thoughtfully, intentionally. When we meet resistance from our kids, what encouragement do you have for us, regardless of their age, whether they're whining about it when they're younger, throwing a temper tantrum, or giving attitude?
Yeah.
What would you encourage us with there?
Well, it's not very encouraging, but you will meet resistance. You will. I mean, why would they ever? I mean, my kids had to make their own lunches starting in kindergarten, and my daughter Walker would come home every day, and I'm the only one that has to make their own lunch. And I'm like, you know what? You get to put in your lunch whatever you want. Every other child has to eat what their mom makes them eat. I'm like trying to like show her these things, but the truth is you are going to be met with resistance. But if it ever crosses that line into disrespect, that first and foremost needs to be handled first, without a doubt. There's never a reason for disrespect. And if you allow that disrespect in your sons, they will grow up to be men that disrespect their wives. If you allow that in your children, they will grow up to be employees that disrespect their employees, and on, down the line. It is, you reap what you sow. So it's like, I am not going to allow that. Having said that, we make our chores on the whiteboard so that there is no nagging, there is no reminding, there is none of that. And so we put it on there. They know it has to be done. And if it's not done, they don't sit down for dinner. And then once our kids hit middle school and they had practices after school and high school practices and things like that, they couldn't do it before dinner because they didn't get home until dinner or sometimes afterwards. So it had to be done before they went to bed. And if they didn't, I didn't nag, I didn't get upset with them. But the next day when they walked up and saw the whiteboard, their second chore was incredibly time consuming and incredibly hard because they did not do the chore from the day before. Because again, we're modeling real life. Just because you've had a full day doesn't mean you get to walk in the door, kick off your heels at night, and just assert all your responsibilities. Not at all. You have to still do it. And so it's like, you've chosen to play these sports, you've chosen to do these travel things, and you're still a part of this family. So it's like, encourage them in a way to do these things that doesn't impact you. Like, you don't want to get into this, match back and forth trying to explain to them why it's important. It's just a rule. It is what it is. That's why I like it on the whiteboard. There's no having to nag, having to check, but just don't allow the disrespect is the big thing when they kind of meet you with resistance. But again, what child's going to be like, sure, mom, I want to take on this? They're not going to. I like I said, my oldest, he did not enjoy doing all the things that he had to do. And there came a day he went to college and he was so grateful that he knew how to do those things.
So we're going for that long-term thank you.
Yes, always long game parenting.
Well, Elizabeth, you have given us so much in these weeks together, but where would you like to direct us to continue learning from you after this chat?
Well, if women live in Atlanta, we do have the exchange, which is local and coming, and I would love for them to come to that. We also have our podcast On Purpose, which encourages women to live on purpose and with intention. I just absolutely love connecting with women that want to live wholeheartedly this one beautiful life we've been given. So I'd love for them to reach out to me on Instagram. I've got my personal handle is Octomama. I also have the Exchange US and Long Game Parenting.
Wonderful. We will provide all of those links in the show notes for today's episode. And I just have one more question for you.
Yeah.
We are called the Savvy Sauce because savvy is synonymous with practical knowledge. And so, as my final question for you today, Elizabeth, what is your savvy sauce?
My savvy sauce today, based on what we've spoken about, I would say to the women listening, to the very best of your ability. It's going to be difficult. It is not going to be easy. But to the very best of your ability, stop overfunctioning for your children. And overfunctioning is simply doing for your children what they can and should be doing for themselves. And my favorite mantra that I tell moms all the time is just because you can do, provide, or give doesn't mean you should. Just because you can do, provide, or give, it doesn't mean you should. So if you want to have grateful children, do less, not more. You want to raise children that have a respect for other people, do less, not more. If you want to raise dependable, reliable children, do less, not more. That's my savvy sauce for today.
Wow. Again, those words just being so countercultural. The
100%.
ways you have given us so many ways to do that. And I am continuously struck by your thoughtfulness and intentionality and your self-discipline to implement all of this. I just wonder someday when you get to heaven, if God will get to show you, look at these generations that were impacted because of your obedience and then your generosity and willingness to share it with all of us. I pray that we take this and run with it, and may the Lord continue to do a mighty work in and through you. So thank you for the gift that these 2 weeks have been. Just thank you for being my guest.
Well, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for that visual because that really would be amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. One more thing before you go. Have you heard the term gospel before? It simply means good news, and I want to share the best news with you. But it starts with the bad news. Every single one of us were born sinners, but Christ desires to rescue us from our sin, which is something we cannot do for ourselves. This means there is absolutely no chance we can make it to heaven on our own. So for you and for me, it means we deserve death and we can never pay back the sacrifice we owe to be saved. We need a Savior. But God loved us so much, He made a way for His only Son to willingly die in our place as the perfect substitute. This gives us hope of life forever in right relationship with Him. That is good news. Jesus lived the perfect life we could never live and died in our place for our sin. This was God's plan to make a way to reconcile with us so that God can look at us and see Jesus. We can be covered and justified through the work Jesus finished if we choose to receive what He has done for us. Romans 10:9 says that if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. So would you pray with me now? Heavenly Father, thank you for sending Jesus to take our place. I pray someone today, right now, is touched and chooses to turn their life over to you. Will you clearly guide them and help them take their next step in faith to declare you as Lord of their life? We trust you to work and change lives now for eternity. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, you are declaring Him for me, so me for Him. You get the opportunity to live your life for Him. And at this podcast, we're called the Savvy Sauce for a reason. We want to give you practical tools to implement the knowledge you have learned. So you ready to get started? First, tell someone. Say it out loud. get a Bible. The first day I made this decision, my parents took me to Barnes & Noble and let me choose my own Bible. I selected the Quest NIV Bible and I love it. You can start by reading the book of John. Also, get connected locally, which just means tell someone who's a part of a church in your community that you made a decision to follow Christ. I'm assuming they will be thrilled to talk with you about further steps, such as going to church and getting connected to other believers to encourage you. We want to celebrate with you too, so feel free to leave a comment for us here if you did make a decision to follow Christ. We also have show notes included where you can read scripture that describes this process. And finally, be encouraged. Luke 15:10 says, "In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." The heavens are praising with you for your decision today. And if you've already received this good news, I pray you have someone to share it with. You are loved, and I look forward to meeting you here next time.